Let's start over because I realized I didn't start recording. Hi, this is the Augur June 18th, 2020 meeting. And we're starting out by reviewing the Google Summer of Code student activity. And in the pursuit of that, we're beginning with Sarit, who's talking about the TF-IDF algorithm that he used to identify patterns on issues and pull requests. And I think you said you expanded your work to comments this week.
Right, yeah, actually I've been working with comments. So the features that used to be TF-IDF vector before, and I have expanded it to like the count of the words reflecting certain emotions, like anger, surprise, anticipation. And hopefully that will capture the conversation mechanism across the repositories while clustering.
And as if I understand it correctly, your new strategy is that you're using nouns and an NRC data set. And I think there was one other word you used in there. Can you describe that?
Right, correct. Yeah, one of them is the count of the certain parts of speech, like noun, adjective, adverbs, and another one is the emotion lexicon. Yeah.
The emotion.
Right.
Content. And NRC data set, what value does that bring to the algorithm that you're employing? Obviously, it's a reference collection of words that shares another piece of information. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So NRC emotion lexicon is basically just a collection of words that's categorized into 6 emotions. So we can use that lexicon to create a feature for the comments we have in our repositories.
And you, I think we talked last week that one of the challenges with this kind of work is that low volume repositories where there are not a lot of pull requests or issues or comments, there's often not enough data for a machine learning algorithm to have utility, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because those are, in most cases, the repositories that folks are less interested in. Could you tell us a little bit about how you're selecting the repositories that you're using?
So currently, we're only considering the most active repositories, and the activeness is like measured in terms of like number of comments. We have some total of number of comments here. If it is like above certain threshold, we consider that repositories. If it's not, then no. Yeah, it's pretty like naive approach, but yeah, I don't know what else to. Yeah, but currently it's just the number of comments. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as you work towards I think it's a really good choice to include the most active repositories at the beginning. You may find, as I mentioned, I think last week, that some of the less active repositories you may get insight from them through the models that are developed in the larger repositories, or you may not later toward the end of your work. I think that's
right.
something to look into. In terms of things that we can look at, I'd like to talk about with everyone this week, just what are some initial targets where you can show us some of the results of the analysis that you're doing.
For me, so I can show the clustering based on these new features, as well as the features I worked in last week, namely TF-IDF vector. Yeah, and then classification of message into anomaly, I worked a bit on that as well, but I'm not sure whether the results I'm getting is quite satisfactory. So yeah, clustering would be, visualization of clusters would be one of the results for me.
And in the visualization of clusters, I think one of the things that's really important is to first label the clusters. So that could be this could be a box or a grid or a table that lists sort of like you put a number in the graph and have a table adjacent to the graph that lists which repositories are reflected in which parts of the graph, and also which clusters each of those repositories are in.
Okay, all right. But the thing is, yeah, I still don't know how to assign a label to particular cluster. I mean, we have clusters, like they are distinct, but what do those cluster mean? Like what labels shall we assign to cluster? That would be a different problem of its own.
Yeah, so you cluster it, but what does it mean that it's clustered, right?
Right,
Like, what does it mean? It's an algorithm that finds similarity measures, but it
right,
doesn't necessarily give you a human interpretable piece of clarity, right?
right, that's
So
right.
I think once you have, uh, so I would say step one uh, is label the clusters, and then this could include a visualization and a table that lists the Git URL for the repository, and the cluster it's in. And
By
then,
table, you mean table in database or just for
no, I mean
visualization
a table that would be displayed on some output.
on dashboard? Okay.
Yeah, so when people interpret visualizations, it's important that we explain a little bit about what the visualizations mean. And
Mm-hmm.
next step, I would ask you for, after labeling the clusters and providing a visualization, would be to provide a caption uh, that describes what the cluster represents, the algorithm you use, so people have some idea what the computation behind it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think a next step, I call it step two, for lack of a better name. Step two would be to show the, the clusters and tables to folks who use those repositories. And from that, I think we will start to get a sense of what does the cluster mean to a human being that is active in that repository, and that will likely provide some feedback that will allow you to tune the algorithm that you're using to more closely align. Not that it won't align well, but for it to more closely align with things that are interesting and not otherwise known for
Mm-hmm.
the consumers of the repositories. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense to me.
Yeah. So that's that's super great, Suri. I think adding the NRC data set and showing the emotion. I think emotion is really it's an under leveraged computational linguistic method, and it does provide more, I guess, what I would call parsimony or differentiation for the clustering activity, and is possibly going to yield more human understandable results. So that's what I would suggest that you do uh, going like going forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, you will know how long. I think some of the technical things won't take you that long to to generate, and then you and I can work together on how to present the information to the people who use those repositories. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay,
All right, excellent.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
thanks.
and I have a screen of people, and I'm just going to go left to right with the folks. Although I'm gonna let me start with I'm gonna start with Andrew Brain, and then I'm gonna jump back to the Google Summer Code students, and I'm gonna jump to Andrew because I know he was super busy yesterday, getting some getting some parts of our standard uh, Augur reports ready to show people. So Andrew, give us a little bit of an update. Let us know what's going on.
Yeah, so I got all of the Zephyr reports things ready for all the new contributors with all of the different graphs that show the actions of their first and second time contributors. And basically it's not too difficult to switch between repositories, which is good for the future if we want to try to make it a standard report so that people can go in and plug in their own repositories. It just probably needs a little bit more tweaking for that dynamic ability to be able to put any repo in it and work instantly. But yeah, it just took a little bit of tweaking, but just with a little bit more work, it should be able to get there someday. And then I also started working on a few of the worker tests a few of the worker tests yesterday for Augur.
Okay. And I think for the and I know Gabe helped you a little bit with getting everything to work for Zephyr and so we have reports that run for Zephyr and for Jenkins X. I think the like if I was to set a priority of saying, Carter, stop me here. I think it's important, Gabe and I think you've talked about the importance of having these standard reports where basically we can plug a set of repositories into them and then just, for lack of a better word, churn them out.
Mm-hmm.
I know the worker tests are also important from showing the CHAOSS community some of the power of Augur and the power of the data that we collect. The ability to just say, here's a collection of repositories, plug them in, and the reports generate is a pretty high priority because it lets us show value really quickly. Carter, I guess I'm saying that, and I'm looking at Carter as our sort of manager of all the things that are happening. How I should suggest we prioritize that because I don't want to subvert the priorities that you've set for the team. So I turn it to Carter to balance those priorities, or at least talk about it. Pardon me while I wrote my copy.
Sorry, I was looking at something. Are you talking about the priorities for testing versus the reports?
Exactly.
That's a good question. I think it depends on a couple things. So the thing with the standard reports is that you, Gabe, and Andrew know them best. And with the testing stuff, I can help with that. So if you want Andrew to focus more on the community reports while I can help with the testing, if that would split things up better, because I mean, I can help with the community reports, but that's, it'll take a little bit longer for me to get spun up just because I'm not as entrenched in it as you are.
Right.
So I think worker tests are important, but it's also going to be a while before we've got a fully complete set. Okay, fully complete is the stretch. It's going to be a while before we have like a pretty robust test suite, and it's probably going to be after these reports are finished. So if we're thinking in terms of what's going to get done faster, and if that's where we should focus, then I would say community reports, because the worker tests, like, the architecture's not done. It's all in place, but like I'm going to have to build stuff for working with doing the actual data collection tests and those data validation queries. So as an effort, the worker tests is a lot more, but the payoff is really good. Am I making sense?
Yeah, the long-term payoff in terms of the robustness of Augur and then the patterns that we put forth that people can use to build new workers continuously and know that the tests that they write are going to validate the workers before we go and collect tons of data, which we do right now. It's just that it's a very labor-intensive effort, mostly on my part, to make that happen. You're making it a lot easier and a lot more sort of deterministic in the sense that it first validates the worker, and then I don't discover small issues as I run it against 1,000
Mhm.
In terms of the CHAOSS community, I think these reports, so the CHAOSS community doesn't see the worker tests. The CHAOSS community sees the reports. And what I think is critical is, so I guess if I was to prioritize it, I would say getting these worker reports set up so that whatever repository set I want to run them against, I can get them relatively easily. That is a higher priority.
Are you talking about?
I'm sorry, I said that wrong. The CHAOSS community reports.
Okay.
Running the CHAOSS community reports
Okay.
is a higher.
You said worker reports. I was like, I don't know which one he meant.
I jumbled some words there. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. From a perspective of driving engagement and keeping people interested and generating new interest, new traffic. I agree. And I think with the worker stuff, I'm keen to do it so that I'm keen to get started on that and really get going, because I think it'll let us focus on other things like the community reports. That's the less tangible benefit of it. But
so is there?
I think the community reports right now is probably the way to go, and we can just kind of slow burn on the worker testing. I mean, we should fast burn when we can, but we'll accept that it's probably going to be a longer burn anyways.
I have two questions. I mean, would you turn your attention to the community reports to help Andrew and Gabe?
As needed.
You have very little time for the next 6 weeks while you're at your internship.
I mean, I can help as needed where needed. If it's like what should we, like, a technical architecture decision or things like that. I mean, right now, especially, I have a pretty perverse knowledge of all of the working parts of Augur, like how it all fits together and where stuff happens. So if it's something like that, I can be more immediately useful. If it's like the planning and stuff, I'll still help wherever I can as much as I'm needed. I would probably focus on something else and leave that to you guys, though.
Okay.
Like if I were left to my own devices, just because I know you guys have it under control, and there's other stuff that I also want to work on.
And I think that if that's good for you, that does make the most sense, because where I see the worker reports where I see the community reports being at is I encounter like little weird glitches where a couple things are hard coded, and then Andrew and Gabe sort of work through that to build it in a standardized way. And I think now that they've made two of them work, they can Andrew, you correct me if my pattern recognition is wrong. I think that you can look at the Zephyr report, look at the Jenkins X report, and say, okay, let's try a third community or a third set of repositories, and look at the two community reports that we've built together, and what are the things that need to change so that instead of something being hard-coded, it becomes a parameter. Does that sound...
Well, yes, I have sort of one question, because really the only thing that's hard-coded repo-wise in the contributor notebook pretty well now is the function calls. So should it be default that whatever repos you put in automatically get run and produce all the graphs for every single repo in the group? Because right now we allow you to put in a repo set and then you can select which repo you want to produce. Or should we just produce all of the graphs for every single repo ID you put in? Because that's the only way you can ever do it instantly. Because right now, if I put in Zephyr, I have to go change the repo name parameters to Zephyr, or if I change to Jenkins X, I have to change it that.
So what I would like, here's what I want. Here's what really the community needs. You put in a set of repo IDs, and it generates all of the reports for all of those repo IDs one at a time, or in the cases where we're doing comparisons, it sets up some comparisons. And then the important thing is that the graphs, and this is where Gabe and you and I have had some discussions, but it's really important that the graphs then get generated as PNGs that include, or JPEGs, whatever, that include the captions. And
yeah,
and I think
that
is the hard that's the hardest piece for some reasons we've discussed.
Would
But
it be easier to generate an SVG and then do something with it? Because isn't that like a more flexible format?
well, the trick that the problem that I ran into is that Bokeh does not make it easy to generate a file, a PNG, an SVG, or a JPEG. Like, it's not designed for that. It's designed to put it on a page, and they just don't have a function that does that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really solving that problem that stands between us and deliverable report, like in NOS anytime with the push of a button.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a conversation maybe you and Gabe and I can have later.
Yeah, that sounds a bit complicated.
Gabe thought that he could figure out. Gabe thought he knew a couple of ways he could do that, but I don't know what else Gabe is working on right now.
I think yesterday he was doing testing stuff. I think validation testing on some of the servers. We talked about it. We talked briefly yesterday. I kind of just did some documentation stuff yesterday because it's out of date again, but not as bad as it was.
Okay.
Just gonna go somewhere else with that thought, but I'm not sure.
Okay. So I mean, I would say that this standard report piece is the most important item of work from a
Okay.
just getting it done perspective, and so I would say that if you and Gabe can turn your attention to that, that would be the most important for you all.
Me and Gabe or Andrew and Gabe?
Yeah.
I'm talking. I thought Andrew was talking, but yes, for Andrew and Gabe.
Okay, sorry.
Andrew, anything else you want to report today?
I think that's it. Yeah, for now.
All right. Let's jump to Pratik. Pratik, how's it going?
Hello everyone.
Sorry, how's it going, Pratik?
Well, quite well. This week I try to analyze some more techniques, algorithm after using STL. But last day I have discussion with Gabe and he is more interested in LSTM model. So I will try to apply more. So I will try to work on more on LSTM model.
And tell me what are the advantages of the LSTM model from your discussion with Gabe?
Yeah, we had discussion about how to implement LSTM is using neural networks, and it contains quite parameters which might affect the model. So we are talking how to more refine that parameters. Also thinking, will it be feasible to use TensorFlow, Keras, or PyTorch for neural networks?
So PyTorch, or what was the other one?
PyTorch or TensorFlow,
Yeah,
Keras.
yeah, I recognize it, but my brain left it.
What would be more feasible for Augur?
More what?
What would be more feasible to use in the Insight worker? Because TensorFlow we need to include in the packages requirement.
Yeah, TensorFlow can be very GPU intensive, which would require some modification to our hardware infrastructure.
Yes.
What's the goal of where you're headed right now?
To implement LSTM, long short-term memory, using Keras or PyTorch to predict the next value and find the difference between the predicted value and the actual value to detect anomalies in the time
So
series
to predict
matrix.
the next value for what?
For the matrix like issues, pull request accepted, predict the next day value, and then next day we will find the difference between the actual value and what the model predicted. And if there is a huge difference, then we will detect it as anomalies.
And so the focus functionally is on pull request acceptance right now.
No, quite issues and pull request.
Okay, so the resolution.
Like issues, new issues, active issues, closed issues, and the pull request, total pull request, accepted and declined.
So I think I see the utility of pull request and clicking pull request acceptance or not acceptance. Help me understand the issue one.
Issues
Yeah, what are we trying to predict with the issues?
are the same. Like if there is a lot of changes in the number of active issues. Also, I found that in the matrix, like number of active issues, like in one issues, if there is 4 or 5 events on the same issue, then it detects 4. I think that should be 1. Like on the same day, on one issues, events were going like 4 to 5 comments, then it returns in the values for like the number of events, but it should be based on the number of different issues worked on that day. That should be the active issues on a particular day.
Okay. So am I right that I'm trying to interpret here, the more events on active issues seems to predict the number of active issues on a particular day. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's useful. Thank you. And then Sai, how's it going? Sai, are you with us?
Hello?
Yeah.
Just give me a minute. I'm just connecting my headphones.
Right.
Yeah, hello?
Yeah, you're here.
Yep. Yeah, so I'm almost at the end of the issues worker. I just have a few more models to fill. So as of now, I've updated the pagination function, the GitLab rate limiting function, and whatever the functions are related to the base worker to be functional with GitLab. So there were some headers, and like most of the stuff was more or less similar, but just a few things like the headers, there were a few differences. So I just integrated those changes and was done with the issues model and the issues assignees. Now I was going towards the issues comments, and after that I'll just test out the worker for 2 to 3 days just to see if there are any bugs which are rising.
So comments are, so you finished the basic gathering of issues, and so next steps are issue comments.
Yeah, issue comments and issue message references. I think that's the name of the model.
I think those are the same thing.
Yeah, both of them are the same. And after that, I think Abhinav is working on the merge request worker, and he created the query contributors function, which is yet to be merged. So yeah.
Yeah. Are you looking at the event? Will the next step be issue events as well?
Yeah, issue events, and I think issue labels is also there. But I think issue with labels doesn't require pagination because for a certain issue on GitHub, there's only a limited set of issues which can be tagged. So there might not be hundreds of issues on hundreds of labels on one issue.
Yeah, labels
So,
are
yeah.
fairly, it's like usually 0 to at the most 10.
Yeah, the same goes with the signees too.
Yeah. Trying to think of, essentially you're making sure that the model for issues that we have built for pull request for GitHub is recreated.
Yeah. And there were a lot of architectural changes in between. So I was busy working with that too, the logging and the logging architecture mainly.
Yeah, I think we, Carter did Carter and Gabe did a great job updating the logging architecture so that now we have a
it's much more clean, I guess.
Yeah, it's cleaner and it's consistent across the workers. Last summer when we built the workers, we had many different people working on them, and we focused on making them work. And I think in the last 2 months, I'd say 2 months, Carter and Gabe, especially Carter, have worked. Although Gabe, I shouldn't say especially Carter. I think Carter has taken charge of making sure everything's absolutely consistent. And Gabe took care of figuring out what consistency would look like. I'm curious if one thing I would suggest for all folks is to ensure that the documentation is up to date, and to the extent that the testing framework is available, which it sounds, Carter, like, is there some component of the testing framework that's available for folks right now?
So yes, you can write worker tests in a pretty reasonable way. I said that's a weird way to say it. You can write worker tests in a way that's not hacky. Is what I meant to say. So the sort of thing you do basically is, there's an example of this in the repository already in the initial worker test I wrote. But you don't connect it to the housekeeper. You don't do any of that. You just create an instance of your worker and then give it a job, a task manually. And then you can start testing it once you've given it that task. Or you can just call specific functions and say, if I call this function with these arguments, I should get this response back. So you can do a pretty much, it's not completely end-to-end because there's not really a mechanism to test it talking to the broker. Right. But that's not as important as the testing of the internals of the worker, which you can fully do now. That's possible.
Right. It's the broker configuration, I think, will end up being standard.
Yeah, and we can also test. We can test that from inside Augur too.
Right.
So that part of the testing framework, which is the most important one and the one that's most useful, is available for anybody to use. And if you just there's inside the test workers folder, there's a file called test repo info worker.py that has a very basic, here's how you can set up a repo info worker object. Here's how you can set up a test task. And then here's like a very simple test that's just like, did the repo info worker object get created? It's barely a test, but it works. Just as a proof of concept and as a demonstration for how to do it.
Excellent. Yeah, I think having that in place is important as you're writing the workers. Last Google Summer Code student we have on the call this morning is Avinoff. Avinoff, how's it going?
Yeah, it is going pretty well. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, audible. So initially I went through refactoring the worker base. I added some methods to query GitLab contributors of the project and adding authentication and task registration. There were some changes which were needed because of we are now using the GitLab API. Basically, these three functions which I implemented are still unmerged because it needed to be compatible with the new worker based methods. So I have made the changes and have pushed it as well. So, like Carter, if you could review them once, and and also I have implemented.
Are you saying, Abinoff, that Carter there's a pull request that you have outstanding that you would like Carter to review for you?
Yes, one pull request I added last week. And apart from that, I have implemented the merge request.
And that pull request is about it creates some changes that make uh, the pull request worker for GitLab consistent with the pull request worker for GitHub. And I think have you and Sai coordinated about that?
Which one? The changes
The pull
to...
request. So there's a pull request that Abhinav has for Sai or for the GitLab worker, and I'm just curious if Sai understands that pull request from Abhinav exists, and
Yeah, I think I reviewed that pull request, but I think there's some additional changes required, as pointed out by Gabe. Let me pull that right up.
okay.
Okay, so it's the authorization and task status registration methods. Yeah, I pulled these changes of my system, and the authorization was working, the test status registration was working. I didn't see the GitLab contributor, so I can't comment on that. There's a few conflicts because I think Gabe merged a few new changes with the rate limiting function, if I'm correct. So yeah, other than that, I reviewed it and it was fine.
Okay, but it sounds like there's some things that need to be coordinated with you, Gabe, and Abhinav, in order for that pull request to get put in place in a way that will work for everyone. If I'm listening correctly.
Yeah, there's just one change, I guess.
Okay. Can I make it or can I ask that it be a priority that whatever those changes are get a high priority discussion so we don't have a blocking issue?
Yes. Actually, like I had already resolved the conflicts, but things got merged up lately. So more merge conflicts have evolved. So I will again rebase and push it, like whatever the conflicts are there. And apart from that, I have also started working on the merge request worker, and I have completed for one model, which is pull request model. And now I would be moving to the next models for like there are total 9 models. So I think I should be able to complete 4 or 5 by the next week. And
When you say 4 or 5 by the next week, what does that mean?
there are total 9 models for pull request, and as of now I have only one working collection for only one model which is working, and I will be completing the rest of the models in this upcoming week.
I think you meant the pull request model, like pull requests
Yes.
and pull requests comments like that.
Events and all that.
Yeah.
Your Abhinav. Your Abhinav. Queenie?
What?
Is that your Gmail?
Abhinav Bajpayee 2012.
Spell that for me. ABHIN.
AVBAJPAI 2012.
All right. assign that to Gabe. All right, so we've got one blocking issue. Not too bad for a group of people working together. Looks like everyone's doing a great job. I'm excited to see, I talked with Sarit, I think, at the very beginning about having, was it Sarit that I talked about having some actual ways to look at the results using you know, basically labeling the clusters so that we can see the visualization, and then let's look at URL for that repository in the cluster and show the clusters in tables.
Right, yeah.
I would say that this is a critical step for anyone writing a machine learning cluster. And if our machine learning worker, and if we need to have a sort of a separate session where we talk about how we might look at that, or what the particular challenges that you might be facing with that particular with doing that, I think having a good discussion about it will be helpful, because the machine learning is really critical, but it only has value to the end user if we can show them something and get their feedback on it. And then that end user feedback helps us to tune the things that we're doing. Does that make, that's a human computer interaction kind of a problem, where don't stop working on all of the great algorithms that you're developing. I think we need to come up with a standard way of maybe talking either individually or as a group about how we might do a presentation, or how we might show that to people. And Andrew Brain and Gabe Heim are two people with some experience showing results that are the output of algorithms. So I will work on setting up individual meetings to talk about that particular issue going forward. I don't know how to assign it to myself. I guess I can't, but and we also have on the call, we have Peter, who has been using Augur, and I want to use the remaining minutes that we have to talk to Peter as a user of Augur. Peter, do you have questions or challenges that you're facing with Augur right now?
Yeah, so for a while I was running into some major setup errors. For some reason I couldn't get the installation from source to work on the machines we have at TD Ameritrade, and I don't know why. It was some error with NPM that I kept running into. Could just be firewalls. Maybe it's not able to access.
You broke up, Peter.
Everything. But I got the. Sorry, my internet's a little buggy. I don't know if I'm cutting it out. But I was using the Docker version for a while. Interestingly enough, just today, the fix I used that I was talking to Carter about getting the two, the back end and the front end to talk to each other. For some reason, it seems to have stopped working. I'm working on that right now. But a couple questions I have is one is, is the Docker version up to date in the same way as the installation from sources, or is the Docker version a little bit behind?
Which
So
are you in?
if you're building from, you're using master, right? The master branch.
Could you repeat that? I bugged out for a second.
You're all good. Are you using the master branch?
I just merged from dev yesterday.
Oh, from dev. Okay. So those builds, they should be keeping up to date. If you're using the Docker images Oh wait, no, you're building locally because you had to make those config file changes. I remember that now. So if you, how do you mean by up to, like, is it as up to date with the source code installation? Like, are the docs correct? Is that what you mean?
Well, what I mean is the Docker build, is it using the same source code as the source version, or are they a few
Yes,
versions behind?
it is using the same version.
Okay. And then, yeah, so for some reason that error started happening again. The other thing is, you know, I was in this call earlier and I'm trying to get up to date with what's going on exactly in the community and what everybody's working on. But one of the questions I had is, should it automatically be fetching all of the data from the repositories when I'm running the containers and I'm adding a new repo?
Like, should it go get it? Should it start go getting it automatically?
Yeah.
It should. Is it not?
It's been weird. It seems like sometimes different iterations, because I had a couple copies where I put the same thing um in the Augur CLI. I ran the same code like multiple times, so I'd have the same version of Git in the same Git repository in there multiple times, and sometimes it seems like it's fetching um it seems like different iterations are fetching different information sometimes. Like the ones that are the same, they're the same data, but it seems like I don't have the same graphs on all of them. And then just recently, I don't know what happened, but the author commits graphs just stopped working. It stopped showing everything correctly. And this might have something to do with you know, I've been trying to get the back end and the front end to talk to each other, and I've been making some subtle changes here and there in the code, and that might have broken a couple things. But I'm just wondering if it's supposed to be collecting all of that stuff automatically.
So it should be collecting. It should try to collect everything automatically. Like if you give it a repo or a repo group, and you tell it which models you want, it should just try to go get it for you as soon as you've entered it. Sometimes what happens is because of the way that we have the housekeeper set up, there might be there's a delay of how long before I think this is how it works. Gabe might correct me on this, but there's a delay between when it checks the database for new repositories again. So it might be that you're inserting and it's not seeing it right away because it doesn't know that there's a new repository. It might be the case. I'm not sure though. As far as that graph you mentioned, I'm not sure on that either. That could be a result of some of the changes that you made. If you have any leads on that, I'd be happy to look at those and see if we can figure out what's going on. Same with the Docker issue. That's interesting that suddenly stopped working today.
I don't know. I think I pulled from dev, and I thought I stashed my changes, but maybe I didn't. And so I think it overwrote some of those changes, and so I was trying to change it back. And it almost seems like the Docker containers aren't being rebuilt when I'm trying to force rebuild them. Maybe I'm just not using maybe I'm just not using the right Docker rebuild stuff. But I can just DM you about some of that stuff.
Okay, yeah, go for it, and I'll be happy to help you get it sorted out.
Gotcha. And I think there's one more question. Oh yeah, so one of the things that we would like to do that I've been working on is we would like to connect Augur to be able to view. We use another application called Fossa, which analyzes all of our dependencies in all of our repositories at TD Ameritrade. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to link a lot of our dependencies to the Git pages themselves, but in Augur, so you could see everything that they were doing. The problem was it didn't seem to like me linking using the URL that I was getting from navigating through the Augur front end. For instance, when I refresh the page, sometimes it just pull up a 404 error.
Yeah, I see that a lot too. I still haven't figured out why that's happening,
Okay.
but I know exactly what you're talking about. It's very frustrating.
And this is
Yeah.
just in the Docker instance.
Yeah,
This is in the Docker. I don't know if it's also in source, but this is in the Docker.
I've only
Docker
ever seen it in
source.
Docker. I've only
Yeah.
ever seen it in Docker. It
I
just like
suspect there's a timeout or a port timeout.
I'm pretty sure it's an Nginx
Yeah.
config thing. I just don't know Nginx well enough to fully diagnose it, but I know exactly what you're talking about, Peter. I've seen that 1,000 times before.
Gotcha. Well, let me know if you have any direction on that, because if I would be able to get that fixed, that would be very helpful for us. Maybe I could try again building from source. It was some really weird issue with NPM that I was running into. I'm not entirely sure what it is. I sent it to Sean earlier at one point, but then I got the Docker version working, so I decided to just go forward with that.
Okay. Yeah, if you do revisit that, I'm not super familiar with NPM. My area of expertise is more backend side of things, but I am pretty familiar with the install stuff. So if it's something installation related, I might be able to point you in the right direction.
Okay, I'll copy over the thread from Sean and I and send that to you just to see if you could work through that at all. Because I think it'd be easier in some ways to get it working on source, so I wouldn't run into some of these Docker build issues.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
And-
Definitely.
and
Definitely.
I think Carter, you'll have a better ability to help with the thread. I don't remember. That was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, wasn't it?
It was about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Because we got the Docker version working. I was just going forward with that afterwards.
I don't even remember what, but I think there was. My suspicion was that there were port issues in your firewall in a corporate environment, if I recall correctly.
That would probably make the most sense to me. Because it's definitely annoying being an intern at a big corporate company and just trying to install anything and nothing works.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Augur will work
Absolutely.
standalone on an individual workstation. I don't know if you have access to a workstation with, 16 gigs of RAM and a decent CPU, but if you do, it might be able to do a trial in that environment than it is to open up firewalls in a corporate environment.
All right. Well, I think that's it for me for now. And if I have any other questions, I know where to reach you guys.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for participation in the Augur call for June 18th, 2020. And we will talk to you soon.